What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Mamaverse Podcast, where we bring in experts in physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual wellness to talk about how moms can improve their overall health in their daily life. I'm your host, Tu-Hien Lee, and our guest today is my dear friend, Paul Antonelli, who is a certified exercise physiologist and professional striking coach. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Tu, how are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us on the Mamaverse. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I feel incredibly honored to talk to you and your audience today.
Yes. So I know that you have a wealth of knowledge in the fitness world. So I want to know, how did you start off on your fitness journey?
I think I have a very relatable story. And I think a lot of people in my industry kind of have a similar story, but I was raised by a single mom and, times were tough and we were definitely moving around a lot. And my mom was doing everything she could to make me be successful. But Michelle Obama has a saying where we love our kids to death and food is love. So a lot of times what happens is I think my mom would, try to show me that she loved me and cared about me by maybe overfeeding me a lot of the time. And, that ended up leading me to be kind of an overweight kid. And as the story goes, overweight kids become overweight adults, right? So I feel like I've been involved in health and wellness for my entire life. Because I was always, even at like 12, 11, 13, like that early teenage, I started to learn maybe I was overweight and I looked a little bit different than everyone else. And, because of that, I got more involved in wanting to be healthier and definitely wanting to understand both exercise and nutrition. So I think that's kind of how I got involved in exercise.
And then when did the martial arts come in? Because I know, you're also a professional striking coach, and that's a big part of what you do.
So I think it goes back to the same thing. Like I was a bullied kid. I was an overweight kid. I was struggling with my weight and we were moving around. And because of that, it was the 80s and Karate Kid was like the thing then, right? So I felt like if I learned karate, these kids wouldn't bully me, So every time we'd move somewhere new, I would try to find where the local karate school was. And back then, most gyms had 1 month free. So this is kind of silly, but I would, figure out in the yellow pages, something that used to exist. I would say okay, where's the local martial arts school? And I would call them and I'd say, hey, what's the deal? And they'd be like, oh, 1 month free. So I would go and I would train for a month for free. And then unfortunately, my mom wouldn't have enough money for me to pay again. So, I'd stop training. And then a few months would go by, we'd move again, and I would kind of repeat that cycle. And then when I was 15, I got a job and I was able to kind of help my mom pay the bills. But I also was able to take some of that money and to start training kind of seriously as a martial arts student. So I've been involved in a lot of martial arts, but really my focus on martial arts started when I was in my late teens, and I started to get pretty serious about that in my 20s. But again, I feel like it'd be very hard for me to unwind martial arts and health and wellness from my life, because these are the two great passions of my life. And they're very related. I always say that I kind of work in the same wheelhouse, whether it's working with a client that's got health and wellness goals, or if it's working with a client that is, hoping to build their confidence, their self-esteem through martial arts.
Yeah. So I've told you this before, but, for those listeners who may not know, I was big into martial arts for many, many years, probably 15 years. And I actually started martial arts because it was my own fitness journey. So I get that. They're pretty much very closely intertwined.
Yeah, for sure.
So Paul, I know that you went to school for exercise physiology. So for those who may not be so familiar with, because I've asked you this question before, what's the difference? What's the difference between an exercise physiologist and probably something that most people are more familiar with, which is just a personal trainer?
It's interesting because I presented for an undergrad college class last week about, what it is to be a personal trainer. And so in general, a personal trainer is someone that's going to work with you on a one-on-one level to help you with your health and wellness goals. Unfortunately, my industry is unregulated. So, it doesn't really, there's no real definitive requirements to be a personal trainer. So, that kind of runs the gambit where you might be working with someone or you might meet someone that's a personal trainer that's very well qualified. They have a wealth of knowledge, they have a great education. But you could also potentially work with someone or meet someone that claims to be a personal trainer that has very little theoretical or practical knowledge. I'm what's called an exercise physiologist, and that's with the American College of Sports Medicine. So to become an exercise physiologist, a certified exercise physiologist, you have to have a 4-year degree from an accredited university in exercise science. And then you have to sit for a pretty complex exam to become a certified exercise physiologist. And then I'm required a certain amount of continuing education, every year to stay certified as an exercise physiologist. Scope of practice is going to be pretty much the same. A personal trainer is going to meet with you. They're going to hopefully work on your health and wellness goals. Exercise physiologist is going to do the exact same thing. The difference being is that I have a stamp kind of that says, okay, this guy has an advanced education and he's continuing his education throughout his lifespan.
Interesting. So you're saying that when you go to Crunch or 24-hour fitness, that the trainers there may not necessarily be certified?
Well, okay. So that's, again, this is an unregulated industry. So my certification,
which is kind of shocking.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem. And I think that we've talked about this pretty heavily in our industry where it is an issue, but let me take a step back and I'll kind of, I'll work my way into that. So if you were to be hired at what we call like a big box gym, typically they're going to want you to have some type of certification, or they have what's called like an in-house certification where they have partnered with a certifying body to certify their trainers. What does that mean? Well, it could be across the board. I once worked at a gym where we had to have a special certification. When I got hired, I was already an exercise physiologist, but they were like, you have to have a certification with this organization that they named. And then the manager essentially gave me the answers on a sheet of paper and told me to go home, take this test at your leisure, and just, match basically the answers that he gave me on the piece of paper to the test. That's really unfortunate, right? Because there's no, it's kind of like the Wild West where, different gyms are going to have different requirements. Now, you may go into a big box gym and work with someone that's an exercise physiologist like myself. That does exist. And there was a time in the past when I worked in a big box gym with the same certification I have now. However, that's an expensive certification to get because you have to have a college education, and it's an expensive certification to maintain because I have to have a certain number of continuing credit hours, and those have a cost associated with them. So the average person that's going to be working in a big box gym, unfortunately, they hold a certification that maybe they were able to take an online test or they had to do a course over one weekend. That doesn't mean that they don't have the knowledge base. It doesn't mean that they're not properly educated. It just doesn't guarantee it. And that's really unfortunate. But my industry is kind of like there's two opposing forces. There is the governing bodies like the American College of Sports Medicine that feels that, all personal trainers should have a college degree. They should have a certain amount of continuing education that's required. And then there's the big gyms where they want to pay people maybe not enough money. And one of the ways they can do that is they can, not require the same type of education, which is a big problem, right? Because the average person, when they're coming to me for health and wellness goals, they may have existing injuries. They may have problems that they're trying to work with in their nutrition. And I have an advanced education and I have what's called a scope of practice where I have to understand where I'm allowed to work and where I have to refer that off to other people. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that are claiming to be personal trainers that are probably doing more harm than good. And I can tell you something too, like a lot of my clients that come to me, they actually have worked in the past with so-called personal trainers and have had injuries or, had some problems that, were more than likely a result of poor training and what we call poor programming. But because they don't the client themselves, they don't really have an education in that either. They don't know how to identify that what their trainer is telling them is probably not super sound advice.
And so that brings me actually to my next question is that, our audience is mostly moms, busy moms, and we want to find ways to stay healthy and get fit. So we think about going to the gym and assuming that the people there know what they're doing because that's what they do, that they should be able to know how to program, know what our limitations are, or at least be able to get us there, but push us. So how are we supposed to be able to identify that? Or like, what is a good way to identify that?
So that's a great question. The first thing that I would say is that, I encourage everyone to work out, and you've got to figure out what that means for you. The three things that ultimately make you successful when it comes to working out is time, putting in the time, letting time run its course, sustainability, I should say. And, you got to create a sustainable plan, and intensity. It's got to be the right intensity. So when when you go into a gym, something is better than nothing. It needs to be sustainable, and the intensity needs to be right. And what I mean by that is that it needs to be something that is hard to do, but not impossible to do. So, when I go in, if I was to, talk to my mom about hiring a personal trainer, first thing I want to know what their certification is. Are they certified with the American College of Sports Medicine? Are they certified with the National Academy of Sports Medicine? Those are the two kind of gold standards for personal trainers. If your personal trainer is not certified with like the American College of Sports Medicine or NASM, the National Academy of Sports Medicine, like I said, I'd kind of like want to look a little bit more into what their certification is. What is their education like? Do they have a degree in field? Do they not have a degree in field? Those are the things that I think they're really, really important. Also, I would say referral. Do you have someone that is a friend that's already working with a coach? And are they seeing results? Are they not being injured? Are they happy with that relationship? Because there's a lot to it. Does that make sense for you?
Yeah, totally. So what are your thoughts on like the way CrossFit programs their workouts? I know a lot of a lot of women do that. And it is very challenging.
Like, dangerous territory, right? So I would say that it depends on the coach. Right. There's some amazing CrossFit gyms across the country. There's some amazing coaches. There's a lot of complex movement in some CrossFit programming. So you really got to be smart about what's good for your body, and you need to listen to how your body feels. A lot of times, this goes back to the kind of the sustainability thing, where if you just started a gym, and you maybe sign up a CrossFit gym, I'm a big believer in walking in kind of slowly, where maybe you're going twice a week or you're going 3 times a week with, a nice 48-hour rest period between. So maybe you're doing like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You're doing like a Tuesday, Thursday. What do the other members look like? Do they look like you? Are there a lot of, women? Is there a lot of men? Are there a lot of people that are in good shape? But then there should be a lot of people that are kind of like working towards being in better shape. Those are kind of some of the signs that I'm going to look for. Again, the coach, what's his background? A lot of CrossFit trainers are really well-educated people. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't do CrossFit. And there are a lot of people that kind of give CrossFit some grief. I don't necessarily think that's super well-founded. There's some amazing coaches. But, there's always going to be some bad apples that make poor decisions and, maybe over program or have someone that isn't, have what we call an advanced lifting age, doing very complex movements before they're ready to do those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in your experience working with both men and women, what are some of their major challenges and how are you helping them like guide them through that?
So we could take this in a couple of different ways. And I would say that I think the major challenge for all people is finding the time, right? Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about modeling. And what I mean by that is that, parents are so exceptionally like dedicated when it comes to helping their children build healthy lifestyles. I know parents that go massively out of their way so that their kids can be involved in sports, so that their kids can be, involved in tutoring or doing like theater or, eating a healthy breakfast, lunch, and dinner because they want their kids to be successful. But for some reason, when we become adults, we move away from those things. Like we know it's incredibly important for kids to be involved in sports, but wouldn't it make sense that adults should be involved in sports as well? But for some reason, and I talk to people that do this all the time, it seems like sometime after college or after high school, most adults, they kind of move away from having hobbies. They kind of move away from, taking care of themselves and start to focus on their spouse or their children. And ultimately, if you're trying to build healthy kids, you need to model behavior that you want them to adopt. Because, just if I tell my son or if I tell my daughter how important it is to work out, but I don't work out, I don't make the time to work out, ultimately that's going to kind of fall on deaf ears. Like it doesn't, no matter what, no matter what my mom and dad said, ultimately I adopted a lot of the habits that my mom and dad had. And I think that's really, really important that you as a parent, whether it's a mom or a dad, that you're building healthy habits. And we know that the 5 leading causes of death over the age of 45 are obesity related. So, are you eating healthy at home? I know it's important for your kids to eat healthy, but, they need to see that you eat healthy. Are you finding time to work out? That might not be, I think a lot of times people think that, finding time to work out is harder than it is, because maybe you're, find 30 minutes where you can go for a walk, find some time throughout the day to do some physical activity. And that could be something that you do along with your kids or your spouse, or, find I see these mom groups I think are very successful where the moms get together and they work out together. And I think these are the things that you can do. But look, it's going to be a challenge. You have to find that time, right? And maybe I think that's the hardest part. Another side of the question of, what's the big difference I see between like guys and ladies is I would say that, and I think some of the guys watching the show might give me some grief for this later, but I think that ultimately guys are maybe too stubborn sometimes for their own good. So when I'm talking to someone at the gym that's doing something, a lot of times I'll be like, well, why are you doing that? And they're like, a lot of times guys, maybe they don't take feedback super well, where they think that they have some natural inherent ability to work out or they're kinetically blessed, wherein often for whatever reason, I find that women are a little bit more willing to seek out that information, and they feel like maybe they need to get that information. Right. So I think that ultimately the women that I get to know and I work with are probably a little more successful than the guys, just because they continue to seek out new knowledge. And that knowledge doesn't necessarily have to be just from a trainer. And another thing I would say is that, I work with a lot of athletes. I'm constantly amazed by the fact that my female athletes are just much more aware of their internal condition. I'll talk to an older female athlete, so someone in their, like, let's say 60s, and they'll say, well, my piriformis is tight. It feels like my hamstring's a little tighter today. My left shoulder maybe needs a little work. And I'm super impressed by that. I will tell you that my male athletes never have that conversation with me. And I'll give you another example. I always go to bloat. Like, bloat is something that all people suffer from. I've never known a guy to come in and say, oh, I feel like I'm a little bloated today. Women are just much more aware of their internal condition for whatever reason than guys seem to be.
Well, I think the women are, I would say generally just a little bit more in tune and with their intuition in themselves. They have to be. So that's probably a part of it. But it's really interesting that you said, I like what you mentioned about modeling, healthy behaviors. It's hard. You have to really dedicate time. You have to specifically be intentional about it. And that's what the Mamaverse is all about. Like, self-care for yourself so that you can be your best and then show up in your family and your job and life as your best.
Yeah, I mean,
So
listen, I have this kind of, I guess I don't know if it's a joke or if it's a parable. I don't know what I would describe it as, but I talk to parents all the time, every day. And I'll say, well, what are your hobbies? And they look at me
my
kind of with a
kids.
blank stare, and they're like, well, I take my daughter to tennis, and I take my daughter to golf practice, and my daughter's working on she has a French tutor, and this summer we're gonna do this camp that's really exciting. All of those things are amazing. And I understand that, great parents have to sacrifice some of themselves for their children to be great. But, you know, you as an adult, you have to find ways to, work on your physical and mental health. And you have to have hobbies. Your
Yeah.
life can't just be, a taxi driver, or I guess maybe we could say Uber driver now, right? Like there's
Mhm.
got to be ways that you find a way to be healthy and active during that. And listen, it doesn't have to be complicated. If you have to drop off your son or daughter for a practice, and you essentially are sitting in your car, maybe listening to this right now, well, why aren't you going for a walk around that neighborhood? Or why aren't you finding a way to be active right then and there? Or, hey, you have an hour, read a book or do something that's going to help your mental health or meditate. These are all things that you don't necessarily need to be investing money in, and you don't necessarily need to be anywhere in particular for them to work.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Just finding pockets of time to do things for yourself. It could literally just be 5 minutes to become present, breathe, meditate. You don't need to go to, some fancy spa
Yeah.
or like you have to drive to a gym. You could literally just, like you said, take a walk right there.
Now, I'll be honest with you too. I think one of the things that I a lot of times I'll talk to parents about, and they'll say, well, I'm going to try to get up an hour earlier before my daughter wakes up. And I don't know how sustainable that is. I meet a lot of parents, they're not sleeping that much to start off with. So if you're a parent, you're not sleeping a whole lot, and then um, you're gonna get up an hour earlier, so you're gonna lose an extra hour of sleep. That's maybe not the best strategy. What I often will ask parents is, how are you investing your energy? Because there's a lot of times that throughout your day, maybe you're losing 20 minutes or 30 minutes in poor investments where you're sitting in a car waiting for someone, or you're, you know, sitting, somewhere waiting for, an appointment. You've got to make sure that you're maximizing kind of every minute of your day. And that might sound exhausting, but really, to be honest with you, I'd rather take the extra hour of sleep and find 30 minutes, in the mid afternoon, maybe when my son's napping, or find, 20 minutes to walk around the neighborhood during a practice. Those are the things that will ultimately lead you to being successful when it comes to health and wellness and probably life in general.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. It's just being intentional about doing things for yourself that you need to do. Everybody needs to. Um, so I wanted to touch upon a little bit about your martial arts background
Sure.
and that you are a striking coach.
Yeah.
So how is that going right now?
I mean, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. I like I said, I've been involved in martial arts my whole life, and I was a bullied kid, and I was a scared adult. Okay. I was someone that early in my adulthood would get into confrontations or things at work or something where I would just feel very not confident. And martial arts had this amazing effect in my life where I don't really feel afraid anymore, and I think if you're a bullied kid, you'll understand that, where you are in situations as an adult where, maybe you have a boss that's bullying you, and you feel like that kid again. Martial arts gave me confidence, and it gave me the ability to feel, safe. I love that. And I can see my life before and after martial arts in two very different lights. I don't know who I would be if I wasn't involved in martial arts. So today, I have the amazing privilege to work with people like myself that needed that home. They needed that place. And I, am 6 days a week working and teaching martial arts. It's, a lot of people, I think a lot of my fitness, my health and wellness clients kind of tease me for that because they think, well, I love martial arts a lot more. And maybe that's true. I'm incredibly lucky that I get to do things that I really, really enjoy. When it comes to health and wellness, I've struggled with health and wellness my whole life, right? I think everyone does. No one has it all figured out. And there's also an ebb and flow.
Like seasons of life.
Seasons of life. Yeah. It's there's been periods where my health is, I'm on it. Like I'm working out 2 hours a day. I'm eating incredibly clean. I'm, competing.
I mean, you just went through a massive transformation. That was amazing.
Yeah.
You lost what? How much? 60 pounds?
So, I had gained about 60 pounds through the pandemic. And just, this is one of the things that people don't quite understand. Like, even though I work in health and wellness, like, if I'm in the gym, let's say 9 hours a day, when I go home, do I want to work out for another hour? Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, that's a hard struggle. And like a lot of people during the pandemic, and certainly as my career has flourished, finding that time for myself has become even harder. So, last year I was like, this is not who I want to be. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of people ask me about if if me being overweight was affecting my business. No, that's the craziest part. My business, because I always say people are paying for my mind, right? My business was growing and flourishing, but I didn't feel healthy in my personal life. I wasn't happy with the way I looked in the mirror. So, I dug down and I had a real conversation with myself. And I said, listen, I'm controlling my anxiety and my depression by eating. And this isn't the way that I ultimately want to live my life. So I, refocused and went back to doing the things that will lead me, or the same things that I advise anyone to do, to being healthy. And that was, eat a healthy amount of calories, find a healthy amount of exercise to do a day. And I lost, 60 pounds, which I think is kind of complex, right? Because nobody wants to hear that, their coach also struggles with his weight. But the truth is that I think one of the reasons that I've been very successful, or one of the reasons that I'm able to relate to people that are 100, 200 pounds overweight, is because, listen, I understand. I've been there. I've been that guy that, got home from a really long day at work and, popped open the Haagen-Dazs. It does temporarily make you feel better, but long term, this is not the life that you want to live. And B, this is not the behavior that you want to model, because, I'm going to tell you this. I love my mom to death. I owe her everything in the world. I'm incredibly successful because of her sacrifices. But I remember as a kid when my mom was having a rough day and she'd get home from work and, pop the top off that pint of ice cream and just start eating. I remember that, like, I have a very visceral memory of that. And the truth is that today I'm, 40 years old. And if I'm having a stressful day, I do the same thing. I'm like, oh, let me get some ice cream. And I pop the top off that. And then for, however many bites, all is right in the world. Mm-hmm. But afterwards, my problems still exist and my health is not better. My health is worse. And, I say this often, we can get away with a lot of unhealthy habits in our 20s and 30s. But as we start to as we start to age, hopefully gracefully, you can't really get away with those unhealthy habits as you, get into your 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Well, huge shout out to you, Paul. I watched you dedicate yourself and really intentionally make healthy decisions, to be more active, and you documented it on your Instagram too. So listeners, make sure you follow Paul on his Instagram, which I will link in the show notes.
Please.
But it's Paul_EP, right?
Yeah, very simple. Paul _EP, exercise physiologist. But just the easy version, the letter E, the letter P.
Yeah.
And you give me a follow, guys. I try to put out a lot of just kind of inspirational content throughout the week. I'll admit that I am not the most well organized social media type, but I always try to put something on there each week. Also, guys, if there's questions, if you have comments, if you have concerns, if there's something maybe you're having trouble figuring out, feel free to message me. I would love to answer any questions that you might have. I do typically get a decent number of messages. So if I don't immediately get back to you, please don't be upset by that. But I promise I will get back to you and kind of give you my 2 cents for what it's worth.
Yeah. So you're quite humble, Paul, but you are one of the best fitness trainers, coaches I've ever had. And this is both just in like just fitness and in martial arts. So I've got to give you a huge shout out there. So those of you who are interested in,
I really
dabbling
appreciate
into
that.
martial arts too, Paul's very
Yeah.
knowledgeable. There's a whole part that we didn't even get into, which is like how you judge for
Oh
professional fights
yeah.
and how
Yeah.
you coach professional MMA fighters, mixed martial arts
Yeah.
fighters. And I love this because I love mixed martial arts. So we love talking about that offline, but you're a wealth of knowledge. So those who are listening, definitely give Paul a follow and a shout out, and DM him, ask him
Yeah.
your questions.
Please, please.
And if
Too,
you guys are,
go
go
ahead. I'm
ahead, Paul.
sorry. I was gonna say I feel incredibly lucky that I've been blessed with a lot of amazing opportunities. And all of those blessings are because of, people like yourself that I was able to meet and work with and hopefully improve their lives. One of the things about being a coach is that, you know, it's pretty rare that you're going to spend your whole life coaching somebody, but my kind of thought process is I just really want to have a positive effect in the world. And I want to kind of leave lasting positive impressions with people. And again, I think that goes back to, when I said earlier, like, talk to your friends about who they're working with, because, I think that almost everyone I know could kind of tell you the name of someone that they loved working with, and maybe someone that they maybe wasn't a great investment of their time. So those are things to consider. But I just want to say that I feel incredibly blessed to be your friend and to have this
Oh,
opportunity
thanks,
to talk to
Paul.
your viewers. It is the Mamaverse is this, I think, amazing thing that you and your team are creating. And I'm really excited to see what happens next.
Yeah, we are too. Totally. And if you guys are wondering why Paul is such an amazing on the microphone, it's because you also have your own podcast.
Yeah, I do have a podcast, but I mean, no one listens to it. So I would start
That's
now.
not true. I listened to it.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a podcast and a YouTube channel under the moniker Combat Theory, which is we look at kind of a scientific approach to martial arts. But I have a lot of things that I'm working on, whether it's working with clients or teaching classes or cornering athletes. I do commentary, I do judging. I recently got involved in refereeing. I have the podcast and I have the YouTube channel, but ultimately, really what I think is I'm just coaching people. I said this to another coach the other day, is like coaching is coaching. Whether you're sports specific coaching or you're educating via YouTube or a podcast, or you're doing health and wellness coaching, or maybe I'm just going for a walk with a friend and we're talking about our day and we're giving each other advice. That's coaching. A great coach should be able to help you live a happier, healthier, longer life. But you know, I like to stay busy. I probably work too much. I think my friends would say that I work too much, but like I said, I've been blessed by some really amazing opportunities. And I just want to continue to be able to put out that education and continue to help people benefit from my knowledge, because I've invested a lot of time and a lot of money in developing a knowledge base.
Yeah, that's awesome. Paul, thank you so much for joining us on the Mamaverse podcast. This was very educational. As you know, I always enjoy chatting with you. So all listeners and viewers, make sure you give Paul a follow, Paul_EP on Instagram, slide into his DMs professionally, ask him professional questions about,
Please don't get me in
well,
trouble.
fitness and wellness in martial arts if you're curious. Paul's great. He's super knowledgeable. So definitely go give him a follow. And thank you for tuning in on the Mamaverse. And we will catch you on the next episode.
Bye too.